Liam Taylor, Timothy Hardwick, Becky Phillips, Claire Peck. Those are the names of the 4 children who were murdered by Beverley Allitt in 1991 over a 2-month span. The youngest was 7 weeks old. The oldest was 11 years old. I am sure if you're a true crime fan that you will be well aware of who Beverley Allitt is, often known as the Angel of Death. Basically, she had what was kind of supposed to have been assumed to be Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but actually this documentary questions that. And I have to say, this is one of the best documentaries about her I've ever seen. To the best of my recollection, I'd never seen a documentary about her, just solely about her. It was always an episode within a series. So this is actually a 3-parter. And I have to say, it could have been 2 parts. It's not perfect. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of fluff in this to pad it out. It didn't need to be 3 episodes. But regardless, I found this really fascinating. So the crimes were committed in 1991. Absolutely terrifying, because I was born in 1992, in March 92, so basically exactly a year after this. Thankfully not in this hospital. But, these poor parents have got their young children who have just been taken into hospital because they're suffering from a mild complaint. One of the children had a small chest infection that would have got better really easily, and he died because she was administering large doses of insulin. I think that's confirmed for a couple of them, but a couple of the children, the exact method of death, I don't think was confirmed. And this looks at, first of all, the circumstances that led her to committing these crimes, and it also details the other children who were potential victims, they were victims, but they were survivors. So she murdered 4 children. There were 5 registered attempts of murder, one of which was actually for an old lady in a care home that she was working at on the side, and she was also sentenced for 6 counts of GBH. She is currently in a mental facility on 13 life sentences, and is apparently scheduled for, she'll be eligible for release in 2023. Fingers crossed she never gets out. This documentary, I could talk about the case itself all day, but the documentary itself is called The Beverley Allitt Tapes because it focuses on analyses of the interviews she gave at the time. These are all obviously recorded. In the UK, police interviews are always recorded, and we get to actually hear her defending herself, explaining, where she was, what she was doing. And for me, first of all, for me as a crime writer, very interesting to hear how the interviews progressed and the frequency of the questions that were being asked repeatedly. Different people were interviewing her, asking the same questions over and over again. She was getting very fed up, and you could kind of feel that frustration in her as nobody was believing her and they wouldn't leave her alone. But at the same time, she would have loved the attention. So it's kind of like, on the one hand, she was getting annoyed that they weren't believing her, but you could also tell that she was, she was centre of attention, at least in those interviews, and that was something that she craved. It is hard to hear how cold she is when she talks about the children, but particularly those who died. She refers to one of the children as it at one point, and this is a nurse. So it's quite tough, quite difficult to listen to, and there's obviously the realisation that this isn't just some random person, sneaking into a hospital and getting onto the children's ward. This is a nurse who is employed by that hospital to care for the children, and instead she's administering insulin. Obviously, absolutely, nobody blames the hospital whatsoever, although apparently she was hired without all of the proper checks being done. That being said, I'm not sure because apparently they were really short-staffed, desperate for staff at the time. I'm not sure if all of the checks had been done. I don't know if she would have still been hired. I kind of feel like she would have been. It was the early 90s. People were desperate for staff. Maybe things were a little bit looser back then until we learned from cases like this. Obviously now it would never happen like this, fingers crossed. But the documentary does kind of highlight the fact that maybe if a little bit more care and attention had been taken during the hiring process, maybe this would not have happened. But at the same time, we can't really think like that. It's quite peculiar hearing her voice and not seeing her in the interviews, because, you know, often with true crime documentaries, you'll see actual interviews and you can see their mannerisms and how they're moving and how they're sitting. Are they looking directly at the interviewer? Are they slouched, head in hands? Obviously none of this here, so it is focusing a lot on her voice, and it's a really fascinating analysis of the words she uses, the way she presents herself, and you can hear her voice getting higher and her voice getting quicker as she kind of gets more and more frustrated and begins to lose control of the situation. And, you know, from an analysis, a forensic perspective, I think I've always been fascinated by forensic psychology, and I think that there's definitely something in her personality here that is worth analysing and studying to the hilt. And this documentary is a really fantastic way to get started with that. It does include some footage of her from the time, mainly press footage when they've caught her going to court or what have you. There are also some stills used, some images of her holding one of the babies. She was actually godmother to one of the children that she was looking after, which is difficult because Kayley Phillips was actually, I mean, this is the one that drives me the most insane. Kayley Phillips was 2 months old when she was a victim of Beverley Allitt, and this documentary definitely goes into a lot of detail about the victims, and both surviving and unfortunately those who did not, and that's completely different to any other episode that I've seen, because, as I said, most of them that I've seen have only been like an hour in length, 45 minutes. They can only cover the basics. Yes, this shouldn't have been a three-parter. There was a lot of repetition, the same points being made, clips from the same audio tapes being used as well. So I did at one point think, have I watched this already? But I think 2 episodes was definitely a good choice, at least, because we got a chance to know the victims. We heard from some of their families, and Kayley Phillips was a 2-month-old surviving victim, and Beverley Allitt became her godmother. But Kayley's twin sister, Becky, obviously 2 months old at the time, actually died because of the insulin overdose administered by Allitt. And the fact that she knew she did that and then happily accepted the very warm offer of being that dead twin sister's godmother is just beyond belief. And when all of this news came out, I can't even imagine what that family was feeling. I cannot get my head around that. And this documentary is just brilliant at giving the victims a chance to be remembered even further. I don't think that there was too much focus on one side or the other. There was actually a few of the victims were focused on more than others, which is a bit of a shame. But I think some of them are just, there's more information about them. Some of them were taking place more at the time of her arrest or just before that. But it's, you know, it's pretty much balanced about who she was as a person, and also giving the victims a chance to be remembered and for them to have a moment of their own where they're not overshadowed by her. And I'm getting a little bit emotional now because it's just such a... I don't understand how anybody can do this, and this documentary will probably frustrate you, but in a good way, because I think it presents the story very well, and it answers... I mean, because I was aware of the case, I didn't have that many questions, but I think it would answer all of the basic questions you had. You know, who is she? Where is she? What did she come from? What was her background? How did she get hired in the first place? Why did nobody notice this? Well, obviously it only took 2 months, and there are cases of doctors and nurses killing patients for years and getting away with it. So actually, massive credit to everybody who spotted this, because 2 months is a very short space of time compared to what it could have been. And the documentary answers every question. Every question I would have had, certainly. It's one of the most frustrating cases, because I feel like each of those deaths could have been avoided. And I just hope that the families are able to find peace to a certain extent. And I just hope that Beverley Allitt does not get out in 2023. That's not acceptable at all. I mean, 4 young children have been killed at the very least. That should be 4 life sentences, life to mean life. And then obviously the surviving victims, some of whom have actually got ongoing conditions. You know, it's not just like they survived and could get on with their life. Some of them have actually got lasting effects. All of these children are like the same age as me now, maybe a little bit older, and it's difficult. Oh, it's really difficult. Definitely give it a watch. I watched it on Now TV. It was originally, I think it might have been a Sky Crime thing, but don't quote me on that. But it's on Now TV. It's a fantastically presented, well-edited documentary. But it will make you feel levels of anger and frustration like you wouldn't believe.